Hello, this is Panic Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. I'm Frank Conkling, and on this workshop, we're going to look at mapping a sectional breakdown parcel in the public land survey system. This is a continuation of sort of our parcel mapping series in which we look at not just the tools that are used, but how a parcel is described and how those descriptions dictate what sort of tools and what sort of approaches you have towards actually determining where that parcel is located. So before we start, let's go and point out again, down on the lower right corner of this initial slide, you'll see a QR code pointing to Panic Consulting's website. While there, you'll see who we are, what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. You'll also find our recent blog posts about the transition that's occurred from from um, from sort of line-based parcels into polygon-based parcels. All right. Also want to remind you, Panic Consulting is an ESRI business partner. We have been for over 25 years, and we are the first business partner in the United States to receive the parcel management specialty designation regarding the ArcGIS parcel fabric. All right, so let's go ahead and look at what we're going to do today. Again, this is a continuation, and this time we're going to focus on parcels and lands that are described using an aliquot breakdown, an aliquot breakdown inside our public land survey system framework. We're going to look at sort of the framework, where it came from, how it's broken down, and then eventually we're going to look at how these descriptions read as part of that. Eventually, we're going to look at sectional breakdown techniques, and then we're going to look at some of the tools that we recommend you use to try to go and do these and the best practices on them. I know a lot of people think they know the PLSS, but there's a lot of little idiosyncrasies to it that you want to be aware of when you're going to map these. All right. First thing we want to do is talk about the Public Land Survey System framework. This is a system that was used and is used to divide lands originally owned by the United States for conveyance into private entities. It started back in 1785 as part of the Land Ordinance of 1785, just after we went and acquired from the French the Louisiana Purchase. And you'll see most of the lands in here originally were part of that that Louisiana Purchase, but it's been extended to others. The first actual parcels of lands that were divided in the United States were actually located in Ohio, and that was originally described as being the Seven Ranges of Ohio. Slightly different configuration. And you just want to recognize that the rules on how to go and build these out have been modified over the years. And there's actually a book that tells at least the surveyors how to go and do it on here. So this extends to all of the states with the exception of the colonial states, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Texas. Some of Louisiana is not involved in it, but most of the United States actually is at the moment. All right, so this is the book I was talking about. This is the manual of surveying instructions. Just a little insight. If in fact you are a surveyor, this is your Bible. This is your gospel. If you're working in any of those PLSS states, you need to learn this. You need to acquire this. I actually have included here with this QR code a download link to the BLM PDF. They actually make it available, the Bureau of Land Management PDF, and you can download it. I've actually opened it up here. This is what it looks like, and it goes and tells you sort of everything as far as how this works, the general plan. It goes over more than you ever really want to know, including, sort of the methods of surveying, how it was generated, the initial points where they're located, how all of these are. Interestingly, for those of you that are concerned about water boundaries, there's a whole section on here on how to go and handle water boundaries, how these individual surveys went, the mineral surveys, some of the other block surveys. It gets into a great deal of detail on how to generate government lots and all of this, including things like the principles of resurveys. Those are the types of surveys that get done now. You'll get what's called dependent resurveys, where they're just trying to go and take the original surveys and make them a little bit better, or independent resurveys, where they're actually trying to find where there might have been some problems and they're going to generate a new survey, which is going to supersede the old one. They have specimen field notes in here, what some of the field notes look like, that sort of thing to show you. Again, this is a great book if you're doing any mapping or any surveying inside the public land survey system. This is a free PDF. I remember when I first started surveying, the edition that I wound up buying was the 1973 Manual of Surveying Instructions, and this is actually the 2009 manual here. So great, great. Hopefully you'll go ahead and download this. It's well worth it if you're interested and want some more information about what this is and how it works. I'm going to give you sort of a tree level overview on some of this. There are some important things to remember. One, the unit that's used in these original surveys are not feet. They are chains. A chain is equal to, again, it was an instrument that we were using. It had 100 steel links. Those links, as you can see from this photo, they actually had little circles there and they were attached to one another. The links are actually 0.66 feet long, about 8.67 inches, more or yet less, and you would stretch them all the way out, and they would have individual markings. You would stretch them all the way out and measure it, and it was 66 feet, and they measured the entire United States 66 feet at a time. But what's interesting about this, once you recognize this, is that some of the things that, some of the numbers, some of the equivalencies that we've learned to sort of memorize, they're not, they were not the original numbers. They all come down to chains. So a mile inside the public land survey system is not equal to 5,240, 5,280. It's actually equal to 80 chains. So 80 chains is 1 mile. An acre is 10 square chains. And the question is why, when they started this, why did they use chains instead of feet? Because feet was also available, but chains was the most common way of doing this. And a lot of it has to do with the fact of how do these early farmers calculate how much acreage they have and how much lands they have? Well, chains make it very, very easy because an acre is defined as chains, square chains. So a section of land, 80 meters, or excuse me, 80 chains by 80 chains, is equal to 640. And if you look at this, if you take 80 times 80, that's 6,400 square chains, and an acre is equal to 10 square chains. So you just move a decimal over one place, and it now tells you how many acres you own. So if a farmer's land is defined as being 5 chains times 20 chains, they can quickly go and say, oh, 5 times 20 is 100. All right. And I actually have 100 acres in here. So they can go in and do it. So just remember that, in fact, when you're going and looking at these things, they have chains instead of feet. Now, real quickly, well, if in ArcGIS Pro, by default, the chain is not one of the default units, one of the default distance units. And if I look here, here's the units that are on here. And this is, by the way, I went to the project options, then go to units, and it turns out that chains is not here. Well, I can actually go and click on this and pull it down, and I can see the chains, and it actually goes and tells you that there actually were some variations on the chains. by default, you can just say a regular chain. It will give you the equivalence of how big a chain is related or equivalent to a meter on here. So that's one of the things if you're going to deal with public land surveys inside of here, you might want to start using chains because that's what the original plats were referenced as. All right. So, ah, somebody in
You see the question?
yeah, I see the question. What's the difference between a chain and a US chain? It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly. Um, if I look over at the options and I look at units and I go to distance, I can see that my chain is 20.1168. If I go to my US chain here, it's extended a little bit further. I suspect it's the difference between the international foot and the survey foot. So they make it the equivalency that way is what I suspect it is. So it may be that you want to use the um, the US chain if you're going to go and use them, but just be aware that for most of us, because of the precision at which these chaining distances are, either one of them is going to be well for you. And we'll see that when we start looking at the actual plats that came out, because none of them were measured closer than one link. Actually, it was about a 1.5 links was the closest the measurements went on. So how did they start establishing this? And this is another one of those questions that we often get, because there's actually about 40 some different initial points. So they would start at the initial point, then it's established within the individual systems. Florida's initial point, I can tell you, is located up in Tallahassee. There's actually a big monument there. There's all sorts of controversy as far as whether or not the location of that current monument is exactly where the initial points are for all of them. That's more of a survey matter, but the initial point is located within that overall systems that you're dealing with. By the way, on this manual of surveying instructions, they go and they actually show you the general plan, and it actually talks about the initial points in here and gives you a list of all the initial points and where they're located. Measurements, coordinate systems. Here's all the initial points and where they're actually located, when they were adopted and such. All right, so the initial point, what would happen is they would start an initial point and then they start measuring the principal meridian. This principal meridian, you have to remember, is actually true geographic north. The intent of it is that's supposed to be due north. All right. And then they would measure baselines. Baselines are equal to the equator. They are parallel on here, and this is basically parallel to the equator on here. So if you think about this, the way this entire thing works out is that what many people think of these sections, these smaller portions inside of the PLSS, they think of them as being squares, but they are not squares. Instead, what they actually are due north, due north, and this is parallel to the equator and parallel to the equator. So there's some trapezoidal component to it. Again, if you extend this out long enough, this is actually a curved line, and these are straight lines. And that the distance at the south end of a section is not going to be the same as the distance on the north end of the section. The north end of the section is going to be shorter than it is on the south. Just a couple anomalies associated with these, but these are not squares. They are not squares. So what would happen is they would go and start with this initial point, and then they'd start laying out the baselines and all the guides as they go along. All right. And they would start measuring north and south and east and west. And they would break these down into basically townships. A township was 6 sections wide 6 sections north, and it contained 36 individual sections. By the way, if you look here, because they had baselines in here, there's a slight difference. These aren't supposed to meet one another because, again, these east and west lines are converging towards the North Pole, towards geographic north, so that the further north you go, they get further and further in. So every 24 miles, every 4 townships, there's convergence sections. These are, in fact, new settings for where that is. So they keep getting closer together the further north you go from these individual baselines. So how did they go and mark them out? Townships are referenced as being relative to the initial point. And this township is the township 1 south and 1 east. So this is Township 1 South, Range 1 East. Down over here, this is Township 4 South, Range 3 East. So it's all referenced relative to this initial point on how it actually starts out. And those townships, again, 6 miles wide, 6 miles north-south. And then inside of those townships, they then go and start numbering them, starting at the northeast corner and going in a snake-like method where this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, drops down to the next here, 7, 8, 9, all the way down until it gets to 36. Well, it's interesting. The way they mark them out is from the top to the bottom. But the reality is when they create them, what happens is they initially mark out these township lines and they start with this outer boundary already marked. And this outer boundary, when they measure it out, they actually put a corner at not just each of these section corners, but they also drop a corner midway. Now, sometimes those are called half sections, sometimes those are or half miles, sometimes those are called quarter corners, but it's halfway between those other sections. So that they start out with these monuments all around the overall boundary of the township. Now, once they get an assignment to break up that section, what happens is they are given instructions that this is how they're supposed to do it. They start down here at the southeast corner of section 38. They go due north, again, using their astronomical readings, and they set a monument half a mile north. Then they go another half mile north, and they go and they set another monument. Then they head due east. And this is a temporary or what's often called a random line. And they'll go along that random line and they'll go and they'll drop a monument here in the middle, half a mile over. And then they'll go all the way over and they'll see how far away did they come from actually connecting to that other monument. If it was within tolerance, they'll go and they'll leave this monument as the valid north quarter corner for that. If not, they'll come back and they'll place where that new monument actually should be. And they'll go and they'll follow this north to here, back to here, come back and check the monument. North to here, back to here, come back and check the monument. North, then over, and then back. North, over, and back until they get to that northern tier of sections within this township. Then what they'll do is they'll go up half a mile and they'll note and they'll drop a corner there. Then what they'll do is they'll go up and they'll try to tie into this corner that's already established on that north line of it. Now, what's happening here is that this this last line that they measure right here, if there's an excess or deficiency, they won't come back and adjust this line here. They'll leave that monument there and they'll throw all the excess or all the deficiency up into that top row. All right. And they'll continue with that. And then they'll come back down and start over at the southeast corner of 35. And they'll follow the same process, 35 up and over, up, over, up, over, and they'll finish this all the way over. And again, until here, they'll set it half a mile up, and then they'll tie in, and any excess or deficiency is up there. All the way around until they get to here. Once they've gone and established this, and you'll note this is 46 here as far as the sequencing. Once they've established this and come back here and said, okay, that's a good corner here, now they'll go and they'll head west also. And they'll establish their half a mile or their quarter corner there, and then they'll tie in here. So what that means is that if there's any excess or deficiency in their measurements as they're going through, they are all placed up into this northern tier of sections and western tier of sections. And it's not just the northern tier of sections, it's the north half of the northern tier of sections on here. So that what you find is that you find that in these sections, these northern halves of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 also are different. They're very, very different from the rest of the sections in the township. And especially in section number 6, it's not just the northern tier, but it's also the western tier that you have. So, and I'm being somewhat facetious here, but if you're a land speculator buying land and you think you stand a good chance of maybe getting more land, you might buy section 6. All right. That's the one that's going to have it's going to have the most variation from the standard 640 acres in it. It might have more, it might have less. It depends upon how this mapping is done and whether or not the surveyor, when they were laying out the townships, whether it was purely to form or whether they had encountered into some changes here. Now, if you remember those chains that I had talked about, all right, these chains, it's just a bunch of little links tied together. And when you're going and taking those links and measuring 66 feet at a time, those links will sometimes, because these are not over roads, this is over through muds and this is through dirt and river and everything. You go and drag them. Sometimes they would stretch out. Sometimes they get real heavy and they would sag in the middle. So you would wind up with all of these variations on here. And those variations, again, are always thrown up into the northern and western tiers, or what we call closing sections inside of a township. All right. Again, you want to remember that. So if you're going to come and you're mapping something and it's located in sections 1 through 6, 7, 18, 19, 30, or 31, you better perk up when you're looking at it and see, okay, where in those sections is it located, because this is not following all the standard rules. Rather, what it does is it says, okay, our goal is to get the largest number of standard types of breakdowns or normal breakdowns that we can. So, for example, this is section 8 here. This is a normal section in which you see 40 chains, 40 chains. This is 40 chains and 40 chains. But in section 5, you see 40 chains, and then you see 20 chains. Remember, they dropped it here, and then they measured up, but they want to split this up when they're dividing the townships. So they're going to go up 20 chains, which is a quarter of a mile. They're going to go up 20 chains, and they're not going to drop a monument, but they're going to divide it up when they divide the plat up and try to get the largest number of regular type of breakdowns on here. And then those areas where it's not, they'll break them into government lots. So that's where the government lots come out, is because of these excess and deficiency areas in here that are not part of it. And it's all caused because of some of the chaining material that we were using, the fact that our material was not super accurate, the fact that we're going and measuring along an area that has it was unsurveyed before. You never knew what type of topographic areas you were going to encounter there. So it was always an issue here. If you take nothing else from this lecture, remember this, that A, sections of land are not rectangular. They are not squares. They have different variations on them. And there's a set of sections that are completely different from everything else. Okay, we have a
Frank,
question. I
yeah.
see it here. Yeah. Does that mean that every township has or had 52 actual monuments around the exterior, or only has monuments subsided that are subdivided? It's a great question. Theoretically, theoretically, it does. I haven't talked yet about what monuments were actually established, and that's one of the other things is that if we go back to the sections, they set section corners, they set quarter corners in here. The things that they never set is they never set what's called the center of section, all right, on here at all, but they did send these quarter corners in here. And I say theoretically because also if you go back and look at this manual that I referenced earlier, and I gave you the link for, and you actually looked at it, there's all sorts of areas. Let's go back here. All sorts of areas where you've got water boundaries, you've got what's called fractional sections. There's all sorts of things that occur as you're going in here and looking through this. You can see that there's all sorts of rules as far as how it's supposed to be broken down on here. Again, I highly recommend it. You go ahead and download this PDF. It's from the Bureau of Land Management. It's a great manual here. Um, Certain townships are offset from one another. Um, yep. Okay. And actually, I did actually start talking about that um, on here. So let's go back here just a little bit on here. So we talked about the fact that A, these are not square. These are not these are not actually rectangles. They are, in fact, this is, and let's not get into the geodetic differences between these, but this is astronomic north. That's north, due north. All right. So that the limits of this are north. So what means is that as you go and move further east and west, due north converges on itself because north is a single point that you're trying to get into. So there's convergence that occurs on here. So if you look, there is an offset between these, and these are the individual baselines as they're being brought in. So you have a difference between here. So you have this offset that occurs at these these convergence lines on here. You also have townships that were surveyed by different surveyors. And sometimes they would try to make them fit. Sometimes they would fit with one another. Sometimes they would come decades after the previous surveyor brought in, and they took their own astronomic observations and they ran their baselines and everything out, and they didn't always fit with one another. So there was often issues where it wasn't quite the same. I'm going to show you in ArcGIS Pro here. Let's see if I've got this here. If I go over to the parcel fabric stuff, I've got this here. Let's go and get rid of this. So we'll see where there's several components, for example, where these townships, because of when and who surveyed them and when they were surveyed. There's all sorts of little things they're trying to fill in where these spaces are. And it's because they were surveyed at different times by different surveyors, and they had to go in and figure out how to fit them together. So they would piece these things together to make them fit as close as possible. And you come across all sorts of interesting things like that. For example, this one township, which was surveyed after some of these adjoining ones, I can tell you just only because I've got some experience with it. They determined that the township, the western township line, should be over here, way past where this original one was already established. They did that, and then they split it up the normal way. But if you'll note, all of these sections in here are shorter. They have a deficiency. They also have an issue here with these lines in here. So again, because these came after the others, they had to go and not go on top of them, but they had to go and make them so that they would fit with one another. The original intents of these surveys were to go and try to define where the land was, but also what it looked like for sales, because the U.S. government was splitting it up, trying to convey it over to private entities, some of those who had served in the Revolutionary War, others they were selling to private entities to raise taxes so they could continue with the government at that time. All right. Closing sections. We talked about that again. There, there are a limited number of monuments out there. There's a set number that's supposed to be there. That doesn't mean it's always there. And again, because of some of these irregularities about the lands where they are and such. Uh, Super interesting topics if you ever really want to just download that BLM manual and start learning some of the nuances of this thing. This is not a simple little, oh, you just put squares out there and you're done. So, for example, this is a township plat, an original government township plat, and this is in Florida. This is the state of Florida. This is Township 42 South, Range 43 East on here. That actually was an area that we were just looking at, and I'm going to use this as an example. And you can see not only were they going and splitting this township up, but you can see where the closing sections have these breakdowns, where over here you've got issues. Now, we don't have any real water bodies in here, or else you would see sort of those irregularities in the water bodies in here. By the way, every state has an office which is responsible for maintaining these original surveys. They are very valuable. At Florida, we actually have a department. It's called the Land and Boundary Information System. It's called Labins, L-E-B-I-N-S, and I can go out to that website. I can tell it what township I'm looking at, and I can actually go and download the original plats. I can download the original scan of those plats in color. I can download the original plat in black and white, which is what this is, and I can download the original survey notes. And I can go through there and try to figure out, okay, what were they encountering? And it will give me, as a surveyor trying to recreate some of these, give me references that I can look for out in the field when I'm trying to figure out where are those corners that I'm looking for. So this is, again, sort of a reference on here. But if you go and zoom in on this, and I've got a copy here that I can zoom in on a little bit better. If I go and zoom in on this, I'll see this is the information that's included in here. Now, there's a lot of things that are fairly regular. For example, on here, I see there's chains listed here as far as what my overall distance from here to here is. This is section 4 and 5. This is the line between them. And this is 84.60 chains, or 84 chains and 60 links on here, so that it will tell me that I can expect that this northern tier here is going to be a little bit long than the others. And if I look, it will tell me, okay, this has got 160 acres in it. This has got 80 acres in it. And this has got, instead of 40 acres, this has got the 49.2, 49.23 in here. It will tell me all these things as I'm going. In addition, some of these also have things like original astronomic bearings in here, so I can use that as an early reference. Again, if I'm looking at this, I can see that these bearings are going to be different as I'm going across. And again, if done correctly, and that's a tie-in bearing, they should all be converging towards one another, is what should happen. Again, this is sort of a normal survey in here, and you can see where it gives me the bearings, it gives me what the distances are in chains that's going through here. 80 chains, 80 chains. This is the beginning, this is the top, this is 86.33 chains on here. All right, fascinating stuff on here. All right, so let's go back here. So again, if you really want to learn about this, download the BLM, start exploring in your state what these are like. It is some amazing information. I can tell you that in Florida, and Florida was surveyed around 1850, just before the Civil War. We became statehood right around then, and they started dividing up the lands that had not originally been granted out. Um, the surveyors here in Florida, they were paid $1 per mile that they traversed, all right, that they mapped. $1 per mile. And out of that dollar per mile, they had to go and provision their crew. They had to go and hire their people. They had to go and feed them. They had to go and provide all the equipment for it. And they had to deal with Indians, the natives that were here. They had to deal with alligators and snakes and mosquitoes, and they had to go and do all this. They had to produce the plat and the surveys and submit it to the government land office before they would even be paid. So this was not lucrative, but these surveyors were true public servants, and they did the best job that they could at their time. And you'll be surprised how close some of them are on here. All right, let's move beyond that. Let's go to that legal description now. This is that next part. Now that we understand some of the framework of how this is split up. Inside of a section of land, the portions of the land, the normal portions of the land, are referenced by how they relate to these individual elements. And the thing to remember about this is that in the public land survey system, when they say halves or quarters, they do not refer to area. It's always referencing distances. So this northwest quarter, which is nominally referenced as being 160 acres, maybe plus or minus, all right? And it is actually determined by taking this monument here, this monument here, and let's extend it out to this monument here, and then looking at this monument to sort of reference, these are the monuments that were established by the original surveys here, and then to create the northwest quarter of a section, what you do is you connect the north quarter corner to the south quarter corner, the west quarter corner to the east quarter corner. Note, no monument was ever set at the center of section. No monument was ever set there and established there. This was all a calculated corner that was put in there. Oftentimes, the first landowners there would establish fence posts there, but no monument was ever originally established. So then if I were going to break this down even further and say, okay, well, what happens if I have a description that says the west half of the northeast quarter of this? I do the same sort of thing. First, I have the northeast quarter to be established. Then I go halfway between here to here, halfway between here to here, and I connect these two up. That establishes the east half and the west half of the northeast quarter. It's always distances that determine this, never area on here, never area. So again, when you're dealing with the public land survey system, You always want to make sure that you locate corners in here, locate the monuments, optimally the monuments, and then you take those lines between those monuments, you divide them, and then you go from there. So here's a question I often get when I'm talking about this with people that don't deal with this all the time. Well, if I have the if I have the quarter of this section that I have to go and build, maybe I'm going and mapping out the northeast quarter, is it safe for me to go, and I don't have a monument here, is it safe for me to go and assume I can just take that overall width of the section and divide that into four? And the answer is it depends. All right. It depends. It depends upon where, which section it's in, as far as whether or not that's how you break it down. If it's one of those non-closing sections here, if it's one of these here, yeah, you could do that if that's all the information you have. But if it's located on one of the closing sections, no, you have to do more work and more research to figure out where that's supposed to be. All right, so again, the issue is you always want to go according to distances on here more than anything else. I see another question in here. Um, were the townships and sections surveyed in the order of how desirable or sellable they were? Not necessarily. I can tell you that, for example, in Florida, it depends upon where there was demand for the land to be sold, where it was being populated. Florida is a very strange place because, for example, they're down in Miami, Fort Lauderdale. As you get further north, there were areas here that were basically unsurveyed for 75 years because there was no one here other than the natives. There was no one here. But as they became populated, there was a demand for, okay, now we want to sell this land off. We want to create what were called patents, the original deeds out of here. They would go and survey them. There was also down in Florida here, we have concerns about a lot of the land was swampland. So they actually had to have a special act of Congress for them to come in and survey the swamp and overflow lands down here in Florida. So there's a whole nother set of surveys that occurred down here. So to answer your question, no, it wasn't necessarily driven by sort of how they were desirable or sellable. There were several factions as far as whether there was population there, whether it was next in sequence, whether there was things missing. There was several things in here that caused issues and caused it so it wasn't a very orderly surveying of all of these lands. All right, so we've looked at overall the techniques of how you should go and do this, what you should do, when you should do certain things. So what tools do you use inside of ArcGIS Pro? What tools do you use? Well, in here, by the way, this is again, this is a publicly available set of data for, this is actually coming from Labins. This came originally as a shapefile. I've gone and converted it into a parcel fabric only because I'm using it for some other things. This is probably the best available, publicly available information on here, but I want to show you some things about this. This is ArcGIS Pro for, what is this? This is ArcGIS Pro 5. Yeah, 5.2. All right, 5.2 has got a really interesting thing to it. It now has the ability to show vertices and nodes. And on here, I can go and I can tell it, I want you to show me a points, multi-points, lines, and polygons in here. And I want you to show me the vertices. I want you to show me the dangles. I want you to show me all different components on here, and I want you to display them. And this is just purely display, but it will show me, for example, Where do I have what's commonly called pseudonodes or multinodes? Where do I have points? Where do my lines stop on here? And where do I have vertices that should be on those monuments? And I can see that I have literally no quarter corners in any of these sections, not in the closing sections, not in the regular sections within these townships, none of them. So this is not a great set that you should use for doing sectional breakdowns. It might be the only set we have, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best set. And then we get into things like this. Now, again, I'm going to immediately think about this 1 through 6, 6, 7, 18, 19, 30, 31. These are the closing sections. Well, even in these regular sections, what's commonly called regular sections, I've got issues with, I've got all sorts of vertices through here, and they are not vertices that are caused by the normal type of monumentation that I would encounter. This basically had been involved in some sort of topology with another data set. And with topology, if you've got more than all the feature classes that are in topology go through what's called a process of cracking where it inserts vertices. Not, you want to make sure of how these are set up. So let's sort of just demonstrate. And I'm going to go over here to a different area, and I'm going to go and show you. This is that one township 41, or excuse me, 4242. I actually have a georeferenced scan of the actual image here that's going to pop up here. And you can see in here again, I'm seeing these are the closing sections, but my data doesn't reflect any of that at all. And, um, so just little things. By the way, let me go and while I'm here, let me go and show you another one of my really favorite things about um, for ArcGIS Pro 3.5 is they have the ability to set a definition query against a layer. All right, and I'm going to go and remove this definition query and show you what this is. All right, on this definition query, this is the entirety of the data, the Labens data for Florida. Gives me the entire sectional breakdown inside of Florida. We've got all sorts of anomalies here. We've got things like these here. This is a Spanish land grant. This is another Spanish land grant in here. So we've got all sorts of weird things going on. But one of the favorite things about this is I can go in here. Let's see if I can go here and zoom to this area here. I can go here and I can say, all right, I want to make sure that I go and take and only show me these sections of land on here. And in 3.5, what's been provided is the ability to go to my layer, and I can set a definition query where it's not just attribute definition, but I can set a definition query and I can tell it to add a spatial clause. And that spatial clause, I can tell it to take this layer and show me those things that are connected to that layer. That's the selection against this layer here. It's going to show me that, and it's going to go and provide that definition query against this data set. And it's only going to show me those things that are within the bounding envelope for that section set. So again, I really like that they integrated this into ArcGIS Pro. All right, let's get rid of all these selections. All right, so if I have to go back here now and do a sectional breakdown, let's assume first it's a standard section here. All right, let's assume that we're going to break down section 15. What my suggestion is, always do this. Create temporary lines, have a separate scratch line out there, create temporary lines, and I've got this demo line here, and I'm going to go and trace these lines here. Now I can go, let's make sure of my snapping. Let's go and open this up. I want to snap and make sure that I'm snapping to most of these, but also remember that this little triangle is a midpoint snap, and that might be helpful to me. I also want to make sure my settings, I'm going to go and at least do 25 pixels here so I can snap a little bit closer. So I'm going to put a line from here to here, and then a line to here. Oh, sorry. I'm not going to do any of those because I'm going to do 2-point lines. Here to here, to here, to here, to here. All right. And I'm going to finish that off. I turn this off. There's my lines on here. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and divide these lines in half. I'm in a normal section. I'm not in a closing section. So I can go and say, take these two lines and divide them in half. Well, that's extra steps. I like to think I'm efficient. Other people say, no, 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 Frank, you're just lazy. Well, I'll accept both of those. So in this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these lines and divide them in half. So I'm going to take over here and I'm going to, the snap is going to be a midpoint snap. I'm going to scroll here to the midpoint snap. I'm going to go and do a new midpoint snap here. Here's my midpoint snap there. All right, I now have the breakdown of the midpoints of these section lines. Again, because all I have are the overall boundaries, I'm going to say this is I can assume this. Always be careful with assuming things, especially when you've got data that is suspect. So if I go in here, well, there is a vertex there. I wonder what that's from. I have no other information on here. If I go and look at this, look at the original plat, does it tell me that there was some variation in here on this section? All right. Oh, it looks like this section, this, by the way, is a water body on the original plat. So this might, in fact, be a prorated township, or excuse me, a prorated section corner on here that someone has put together on here. So again, I'm going to do more research in here, but it looks like some of it originally, there was water body there. It doesn't mean it was navigable that they had to go around, but it was water there. And they might have put a monument in there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly where it is. So again, I always want to go and knowing what I know about the way sections are broken down, knowing how this is all supposed to be done and what natural conditions there were, I always want to look. So let me go and do one more thing. Let's turn off that original plat. Let's go back here and oh, no, it looks like that is actually on some sort of ground, but it might be right there by the waterway. So I'm not quite sure where that's located. I also know, by the way, that this is now heavily built, so there's other information in there as far as where these lines are. But if I'm just asked to go ahead and divide it up on that, that's the technique I'll use. I'll go ahead and use temporary lines, use whatever monuments I have confidence in, establish those, and break it down. If I go over to an area, for example, maybe here, this is section 29. The first thing I think about is 29, a closing section. No, it's not. So if I have to go and break down this section here, I'll go and do the same sort of thing. I'll go, by the way, let me go and set this so this doesn't rubber band anymore as I'm building this. All right. And let me go and build these lines here to here, here to here, here to here, and here to here. I can turn this off. I'm left with this. I can now go and put in my other lines here. I have my midpoint snap on here. I have my midpoint snap here. I have my midpoint snap here. And I have my midpoint snap here. If I have to break this down further, into the northeast of the northeast, I can do the same thing. But notice one of the things I can't do is I can't just say, well, midpoint, because that's a single line in here. So it's at that point that I'll select all of these lines and I'll select all of these lines and I'll run through a tool called Planarize. And Planarize will go and divide all these lines up for me. Now, when I go in here and go to break this down even further, I'll go and I'll say, okay, now let's do a midpoint here, because now that's a separate line. And I can go to a midpoint there, midpoint here, midpoint here, and now I have the northeast of this section of land on here. All right, this is general tools on here. You want to look at doing splits, maybe divides. You want to look at planarize. These are normal type of rules you want to do. You do not want to divide polygons, which you're going to divide it by widths and such. You don't want to do that. Instead, you want to divide lines because within the public land survey system, divisions are by distances, not by areas. So we're getting close to the end of the workshop. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in here in the chat window. I thank you all for being here, and hopefully you'll join us next time. And again, thanks. And anytime you have any questions, anything you want to go and talk about, any topics, please send them to me. You'll see my contact information here as well as here. Thanks for coming.